Her son froze mid-toast when he saw her, his mother seated alone in the VIP balcony. The venue? Hers now. The legacy he built with his bride? Signed beneath her name. Once he'd placed her at the back of the room. Now she owned the floor beneath his feet. "Remember me, Marcus?" she whispered. "I'm the guest you tried to forget." "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The first thing Valerie noticed was the silence. Not the hush of reverence, but the kind of practiced quiet that falls over a room when someone uninvited walks in anyway. Charleston's humidity clung to her collar as she stepped into the venue's foyer. Arched windows, white columns, floor polished to the point of self-consciousness. A girl in a beige headset smiled tightly and asked for her name. "Valerie Monroe," she said. "Mother of the groom." The girl hesitated, then flipped through the seating chart with too much effort for something that should have been automatic. Her eyes froze. "Oh," she said, "you're listed as guest, table 17. Valerie blinked once. "Excuse me? I can double-check, but that's what we have here." Valerie looked past her, through the open ballroom doors. Paige's family filled the front rows like they'd rehearsed it. Matching cream fascinators, suits with pocket squares, laughter that rose just loud enough to establish ownership. Marcus was nowhere in sight. Table 17 sat near the catering door, behind the DJ booth, the farthest spot from the aisle. Strangers milled there, none of them familiar. One man already had his tie loosened. Valerie glanced at the ivory card in her hand. Valerie Monroe guest. The word hovered like a bruise. Before she could speak again, two ushers approached with apologies already on their lips. "Ma'am, I think someone accidentally took your seat at the ceremony. Can we escort you to your assigned table?" Assigned. Not invited, not honored, just placed. She followed without a word. The ceremony had already begun. Paige stood radiant in a backless gown, surrounded by blooming hydrangeas and 6 bridesmaids in muted blush. Her father beamed like a man who'd just bought the house outright. Valerie slid quietly into the back row as Paige's sister began reading Corinthians like a TED Talk. A few heads turned, politely, dismissively. Then Marcus entered. Her son. Her only child. He looked handsome, nervous in the way grooms often are. But when he turned to face the aisle, his eyes scanned the front row, then fixed on Paige. He never looked back. Not once. Not even when Paige's mother dabbed her eyes dramatically, as if mourning the end of her daughter's maidenhood. Not even when the officiant said, "And to both families who brought them here." Beverly leaned in, her voice soft but sharp. "You okay?" Valerie reached for the water glass in front of her, sipped it slowly. "Hydrated," she said with a faint smile. As the applause rose, as cameras clicked and Paige tossed back her curls like a shampoo ad, Valerie reached into her purse. She took the seating card, the one with guest stamped like a warning, and folded it once. Then again. A clean, quiet crease. She didn't tear it. She wasn't angry. She was awake now. At the reception, the same tone echoed. Paige's uncle gave a toast before Marcus could even hold a mic. Someone introduced Paige's grandfather as the real patriarch. Valerie's chicken was cold when it finally arrived. No one asked if she wanted wine. Marcus passed her table once, paused, almost said something, then kept walking. Beverly squeezed her hand under the tablecloth. "We can go," she whispered. Valerie shook her head. Not yet. She wasn't done watching. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, and from across the room, Paige posed with her parents beneath a floral arch. The photographer never once looked Valerie's way. She unfolded her card in her lap, smoothed the creases, looked down at it like it had just told her a secret, then she tucked it into her clutch, and smiled. Not kindly, just calmly, because outside this room the ink was already drying on a different kind of guest list, and Valerie Monroe was signing her name at the top. Valerie stirred her tea with the kind of patience that made clocks nervous. It was Sunday morning, 2 days after the wedding, and the house was still. Her wide-brimmed hat sat untouched on the hall table. Her silk clutch rested on the kitchen counter, folded card still inside. She hadn't unpacked from Charleston, but she'd made 2 phone calls. The first was to her accountant, the second was to no one. She'd dialed Marcus, let it ring twice, then put the phone down. That was all the conversation she could afford. Outside, wind ruffled the hydrangeas lining her porch. She sipped. It tasted like it always did, lemony, precise, calm. But the taste didn't reach her chest. Not yet. The email came in at 10:14 a.m. Subject, preliminary market valuation, Oak Harvest Estate, Charleston. Her eyes scanned the figures. Property tax roll, renovation estimates, commercial potential. It was all there, dry, formal, full of zeros. Her breath came slower. She'd known instinctively the place was overpriced, styled to look heritage chic, but with aging plumbing and a sound system from the Clinton years. She'd counted 7 tripping hazards and 3 exits that didn't meet code, and they'd charged full premium for it because Paige's family liked how it looked in photos. Valerie closed the report, opened a new browser window. She logged into her LLC account, Monroe Haven Holdings. No signature, no hints. Just clean inquiries, quiet capital. She drafted a message. Dear owners, I represent a private buyer with long-term event property interest in the Charleston area. Please advise if your estate is currently under consideration for sale or if discretion-based negotiation is welcome. Respectfully, V. Monroe, MHH, Acquisition Division. She hit send, then leaned back in her chair and let the silence stretch. The teacup clinked lightly as she set it down, and in the stillness, her memory opened. Not like a wound, but like a ledger. It was 1998. Rainy. The phone call from the hospital came on a Tuesday. Charles had collapsed at the job site. Aortic dissection. Gone before they wheeled him off the scaffold. Marcus had been 9, and Valerie, barely 40, had tucked away her grief, filed for insurance, and gone to work 3 days later in heels that pinched because mourning didn't pay mortgages. She paid for every school uniform, every wisdom tooth. She sat through every awkward PTA fundraiser while working the night shift as a leasing associate. By the time Marcus got into Emory, she'd saved enough to cover his tuition outright. When he graduated, she gave him the keys to her late husband's car and co-signed his business loan. He said she made him feel legacy rich. And when he told her about Paige, how her family is a little high-strung but they're successful, Valerie smiled and said, "Just be kind to each other." That was her only ask, but kindness had not been baked into the wedding planning, not when Paige's family controlled the vendor list, the color palette, even the font on the invitation. Valerie had offered to help with table settings and was told, "Paige has it handled, maybe just enjoy the day." She had funded 40% of that day and sat beside a DJ speaker like she was someone's cousin's +1. Beverly had called last night. "You want me to raise hell?" "No," Valerie said. "That's not my style." "What is your style then?" "Measured." Now, she opened her clutch and pulled out the folded card. She stared at the word again, GUEST, as if it held new weight. She didn't cry. Not over labels. But she did smirk. Because the most effective correction isn't a confrontation, it's a quiet rewrite of the page. Her phone buzzed. New message. From Oak Harvest Events. Subject, Discreet buyer inquiry. Ms. Monroe, we may be open to offers under confidentiality. Retiring soon. Let's talk. Valerie smiled, this time for real. She opened her notebook, wrote one word at the top, reclamation, then drew a line beneath it, steady, precise, final, and whispered, "Let's begin." The napkin was cloth, but it hadn't been pressed properly. A crease ran diagonally across it like it had been folded in haste, just enough to fake care. Valerie lifted it delicately into her lap and glanced around the table. 8 chairs, 7 filled. To her left, a balding man in a navy sports coat scrolling through email on his phone. To her right, a woman who introduced herself earlier as Brenda, Carlton's HR director, and who hadn't said another word since. Carlton, as in Paige's father. The entire table, it seemed, was a scatterplot of his professional network. No one asked Valerie how she knew the couple. No one asked anything at all. A waiter passed by with a tray of sparkling cider, bypassed their table, then doubled back with a flustered smile. "Oh, sorry, thought you'd been served." He placed a lukewarm plate in front of her. Chicken breast, steamed broccoli, a scoop of orzo that stuck to itself like damp confetti. The garnish looked like it had been dropped by accident. Valerie picked up her fork, tested the edge of the chicken. Tough. Still, she cut a bite, chewed quietly. Across the ballroom, laughter rippled as Paige's family gathered for group photos. They had matching corsages and monogrammed napkins. Her uncle had changed into white loafers. Paige's younger cousins giggled near the chocolate fountain. Valerie hadn't been asked to pose. She hadn't even been introduced. From the head table, Marcus stood. A soft clinking echoed as he tapped his glass with a fork. Valerie paused mid-bite. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," he said, smiling toward Paige, who looked up like she was watching her investment appreciate. "And to both families, especially Paige's, who made this day possible." The room applauded. Valerie's hands didn't move. Her face held steady, serene, practiced, but her jaw clenched beneath the surface. She reached for her water, took a sip, swallowed more than the liquid. Paige's mother stood next, lifting a glass and waving away the mic like a celebrity who didn't need amplification. "You know," she said, voice pitched perfectly for the room. "When Paige and I first toured this venue, I just knew it was the one. It speaks to our family's taste, understated elegance." Valerie raised one eyebrow. The ceiling fans creaked slightly. From where she sat, she could see a crack in the crown molding behind the DJ booth, a tiny water stain near the baseboard. Understated, sure. Valerie slowly turned her head and began scanning the ballroom, not for faces, not anymore, but for structural tells. Ventilation placement, flooring seams, the catering setup, narrow, outdated. Electrical outlets were sparse. One cord was taped to the floor with a strip of black gaffer's tape. She tucked that detail away. Quietly. From the other side of the table, Brenda cleared her throat. "I think the dessert's lemon tart," she offered, finally acknowledging Valerie's existence. "I'm more of a pound cake woman," Valerie replied. Brenda blinked, then nodded. "Right." Valerie smiled, not warmly. After the father-daughter dance, which Paige's father introduced himself, then narrated for no apparent reason, Valerie stood. She didn't need another moment to cement her position in this room, but she did want one more look at what she was about to own. She approached one of the staff, an older gentleman refilling candles near the bar. "Excuse me," she said. "I was here years ago. My late husband and I used to come for jazz nights when it was still Oak Harvest Tavern. Is there any chance I could see the original dining hall?" The man lit up. "Course. You remember that? It's been a while. Come on, I'll show you." As they walked through the side hallway, past framed photos of weddings and soft-focus sepia images of the estate's supposed heritage, Valerie took mental notes. Ceiling height, load-bearing beams, room for a mezzanine. They reached the back parlor, unused tonight, dark wood floors, fireplace with an outdated mantel, potential. She took it all in, not with a guest's eyes, with an owner's. "Thank you," she said as they returned. Back at the table, dessert had been served. Lemon tart. Melted slightly. She didn't sit. She glanced at the room one final time, and in her mind peeled back the layers of pretense-like wallpaper that was never sealed right. The renovations had already begun, even if no one knew it yet. Valerie sat beneath the soft whir of her sunroom fan, fingers laced, laptop open. The morning light cut a clean path across the marble tabletop, illuminating the folder she'd labeled in plain black ink. Charleston. Property inquiry. No flourishes, no assumptions. Her inbox chimed. One new message. Subject: counteroffer plus confidentiality terms. From L. Levy, Oak Harvest Estate. She clicked. "Ms. Monroe, we are open to selling. My wife and I are retiring to Beaufort and prefer a clean exit. No listing, no bidding war. We ask only for discretion, fair valuation, and a 60-day close." Valerie leaned back, sipped her chicory coffee, and allowed herself a small breath of satisfaction. Not victory, not yet, just traction. She replied, "Accepted. I'll have my holding company initiate next steps. Legal counsel will contact you within 48 hours. She paused, then typed one more line. P.S. I plan to keep the bones, just not the decor. By noon, she had filed paperwork to activate Cypress Tide LLC, a dormant acquisition shell she'd used once before during a low-profile condo buyout in Savannah. Everything clean, anonymous. Her name wouldn't appear anywhere until closing. The same day, Beverly showed up unannounced with a tin of lemon cookies and suspicion written all over her face. "You're too quiet," Beverly said, sliding into the sunroom chair like she owned it. "That means you're either baking revenge or planning a redesign, and I've seen you bake." Valerie smiled without looking up. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Beverly popped a cookie in her mouth and spoke around the crumble. "Talk to me. What are you doing?" Valerie finally met her gaze. "It's not revenge, Bev." Beverly raised one skeptical brow. "It's a redesign," Valerie clarified. "Of space, of memory, of expectation." Beverly exhaled, long and theatrical. "Just promise me it won't end with someone crying in a fountain." Valerie smirked. "No promises." That afternoon, Valerie submitted a formal request for blueprints through her LLC's legal counsel. Oak Harvest sent them the next morning, rolled neatly, digital scan included. She studied them like scripture. The ballroom, too long, acoustically flat. Bridal suite, poorly insulated, barely bigger than a closet. Electrical grid needed rerouting. Parking, a mess. But the bones were there, solid, southern, reworkable. She made notes in red ink across every margin. Add skylight above foyer. Install acoustic panels. Open up west wing for gallery space. It became a quiet blueprint of reclamation. She didn't tell Marcus, not because she wanted to punish him, because some silences deserved to be permanent. That evening, while dinner simmered and Miles Davis played low in the kitchen, her phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. At Page Harbor Events posted a new photo. Valerie clicked. A shot of Paige in her wedding dress, arms looped through her mother's, their faces radiant. Caption: 3 generations of Harbor women made this day possible. Family is everything. Backbone of the celebration. Valerie stared at the screen, not bitter, just sharpened. She tapped the heart button, then closed the app. 5 minutes later, she emailed her interior architect, subject line, concept pitch, private renovation attached, the blueprints, a spreadsheet of necessary upgrades, and a folder titled Presence Greater Than Prestige. In the body, she wrote, "I want this space to breathe again. Not just for photos, for dignity, for every woman who's ever been placed at table 17. She hit send. The cursor blinked for a second before the window closed. Downstairs, the oven timer chimed. Valerie stood slowly, tucked her seat card deeper into her clutch drawer, and glanced once more at the contract offer sitting on her printer tray. No confetti, no announcement, just black ink on white paper. Signed, dated, sealed. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in amber. Inside, Valerie flipped the light switch and started the real work, because if Paige thought she had built a legacy with lace and centerpieces, Valerie was about to teach her the language of foundations. The front gate creaked open at 6:42 a.m., 2 days after the paperwork was finalized. A white truck marked Charleston Custom Build and Design pulled into the gravel lot, and Valerie stepped out from her car in a camel trench, clipboard in hand. No entourage, no clipboard handler, just her. "Morning, Ms. Monroe," the foreman said, jogging up with coffee and blueprints under his arm. "Let's walk," she replied. They started at the ballroom entrance, where the double doors groaned ever so slightly, something no one had noticed during the wedding but had grated at Valerie like an unsaid insult. "These hinges?" she said. "Oil and replace. They don't open. They apologize." The foreman chuckled but scribbled it down without argument. She moved methodically, past the buffet alcove with the warped floorboard, trip hazard, through the bridal suite, insulate. Enlarge, brides deserve breath, and down the west wing corridor that once smelled faintly of mildew. When they reached the back garden, Valerie paused. There, at the edge of the property, was the exact spot she'd stood for her husband's memorial 20 years ago, Not this venue, not this land, but a garden like this one. Quiet, unassuming, holy in its restraint. "I want raised seating there," she said softly. "Accessible rows, shade protected. No guest of any age should feel tucked away like a spare part." The foreman nodded again. Work began that week, silently, efficiently. Scaffolding rose behind blackout tarps. Trucks came and went before 8 a.m. Paperwork was filtered through Cypress Tide LLC, never touching her name. The levy nameplate was quietly retired. A new plaque would come, but not yet. Inside, Valerie met with her interior architect beneath a spread of new samples. Linen, oak, brushed brass. The new vision was less colonial mimicry, more warmth-forward restoration. She wanted light that landed on everyone, no matter the table. She pointed to the HVAC schematics. Add zoning, real climate control. It was boiling back there during the first dance. "Generator?" her architect asked. "Backup and sound shielded," Valerie replied. "Storm weddings won't cancel." Beverly stopped by mid-week, carrying a binder of resumes and a smile of barely restrained glee. "You told me to find staff who know how to listen to older women," she said. "So I called 3 retired hospitality trainers and 2 former military coordinators. We're going to run this place tighter than Fort Jackson in July." Valerie grinned. "Just make sure they pass background checks and know the difference between ma'am and ma'am." By Friday, the new carpet order was placed. The vanity lights were replaced with dimmable fixtures that didn't wash people out like ghosts. The bridal entrance? Rebuilt to face the sun, not the service lot. Valerie stood at the far end of the ballroom as a painter touched up the newly exposed beams. "You know," her architect said, arms crossed beside her, "we could do a plaque, a small one. Say who owns it now, who saved it." Valerie didn't answer right away. She watched the light change as it filtered through the fresh archway they'd opened near the west wall. For the first time, this room had breath. "I don't need a plaque," she said finally. "The work will speak." The architect tilted her head. "You sure you don't want a public dedication?" Valerie's smile was slow, controlled, electric. "Oh, I plan to unveil it," she said. "Just not yet." The contractor called her over. Something about load-bearing specs for the new mezzanine. As she crossed the floor, the scent of fresh timber and lemon cleaner followed her. A breeze passed through the open bay door, and outside, in the corner of the lawn, a caterer's assistant took a selfie with the scaffolding behind her, captioning it, "Big upgrades coming to Charleston's oak harvest." "Watch this space." Valerie saw it through the window and said nothing, because watching was exactly the point. Let them watch. Let them guess. Let them walk back in one day into the room they thought they'd owned and realize they were standing in hers. The email arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between an invoice for light fixtures and a note from Beverly about still interviewing that pastry chef who listens more than she talks. Subject: Event Inquiry. 50th Anniversary Celebration. From Marissa Harbour to events@cypresstide.com. Valerie was rereading blueprints in her study when her venue manager, June, forwarded it. "Thought you'd want to see this." "Looks like they don't know." Valerie opened the attachment. Paige's mother, Marissa Harbour, had filled out the standard online booking form. Date, number of guests, requested ballroom and garden access, and a short note. "We'd love a warm, elevated space for our family to celebrate love and legacy." Valerie didn't laugh, but her smile stretched slow and clean. She called June. "Confirm the booking. You want to—" "Full rate, no discount, no heads up." June exhaled, a grin audible in her breath. "Copy that." That afternoon, Valerie walked the venue alone. The carpet installers had finished early. The new sound system was synced to voice control. She paused near the bridal suite, soft blush walls now framed with custom sconces, and opened the glass case newly mounted near the vanity. Inside, a rotating digital display, cycling gently through archived images of previous weddings and events. Smiling grandparents, awkward first dances, a series of photos from Marcus and Paige's wedding carefully selected. One image lingered longer than the others. Valerie in the back row, half lit, hands folded in her lap. The caption below read simply, "Every seat holds a story." She closed the case and moved to the control panel near the ballroom. Lighting presets, camera angles, scene memory settings. She adjusted the ceremony mode to cast a soft halo over the back corner where table 17 once sat. The light would fall gently but clearly on whoever ended up there next. She labeled the setting Visibility. In the AV archive, she located Marcus's wedding footage, compressed file, high quality, labeled by the videographer under Wells Harbor Celebration. She downloaded it to a private drive, no need to review it yet, but she'd keep it, unedited, uncut, real. That evening, Beverly arrived with sweet tea and a question already brewing. "You look like you just bought someone's future." Valerie nodded toward the hallway. "Come see." They walked together past the new wood inlay trim, past the framed artist sketches of the redesign, and stopped just outside the main ballroom. There, in a shadow box mounted beneath the new wall sconce, sat a single item, the ivory seating card, still folded at the center, still marked, Valerie Monroe, guest. Beverly stared at it for a long time. "That's cold," she said finally. "No," Valerie said softly. "That's called preservation of facts." The week passed in a rhythm that felt more like choreography than business. Staff rehearsed setups. Caterers tested plating on ceramic rather than plastic. June updated the guest list intake forms to include optional pronouns and mobility requests. The Harbors didn't ask questions, didn't inquire who owned the space. They just signed the contract and paid the deposit in full. By the morning of the event, the chandeliers gleamed, the garden seating had been wiped down twice, and the champagne had been chilled to 41 degrees on the dot. Paige's family began arriving around 5 p.m. Marissa Harbor wore mauve. Her husband barked a request about temperature control. Paige arrived late, trailing her cousins, hair pulled into an effortless twist that cost someone $300. They oohed and ahed over the woodwork, the foyer, the floral arch. Every inch of Valerie's renovation passed off as well chosen by the manager. June played her part, perfectly. By 6:30, the guests were seated. The camera crew began recording, and from the corner of the surveillance office, just off-site remote feed open, Valerie watched. Watched them marvel, watched them praise the upgrades, watched Paige pause briefly at the bridal suite door, staring at the photo loop. Her jaw tensed, but she said nothing. By 7 o'clock, speeches began. The ballroom shimmered, and in the back hallway, just beyond the reach of fanfare, a woman named Valerie Monroe sat in a linen chair, sipping tea from a travel mug. She wasn't invited. She didn't walk through the doors. She didn't need to. She already owned the floor beneath their feet, and they hadn't even looked down yet. By 3:12 p.m., Paige was already behind schedule and visibly annoyed. She strode into the main foyer with her phone in hand and her mouth mid-command. No, the seating chart's wrong. My family should be near the stage, not scattered like extras." June, calm in her navy blazer and flat loafers, offered the same professional smile she'd used on hundreds of difficult clients. "The layout is standardized for flow and accessibility. We avoid tiered placements. It's part of our inclusivity policy." Paige blinked. "Well, our guests don't need inclusivity. They need visibility." June didn't flinch. "All our guests receive both." Marissa Harbor trailed behind, fanning herself with a folded program. "The space is fine," she said, with the same tone someone might use at a disappointing spa. "But could we freshen the aesthetic? I'm thinking lighter linens, less of this earth tone moodiness. We're celebrating, not baptizing." "The aesthetic is intentional," June replied smoothly, "and contractually pre-selected during booking. But we're happy to swap floral arrangements, provided the florist is still on site." Paige bristled. "Then at least swap the seating. I want our family together, near the front, VIP placement. That's non-negotiable." June checked her clipboard. "We don't designate VIPs. We believe all families deserve dignity. And under venue policy, we don't enable exclusionary layouts." Paige's eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped half an octave. "Who runs this place?" June smiled wider. "A woman who knows how to stay present and invisible, much like good architecture." Upstairs, in the surveillance lounge above the mezzanine, soundproofed and tucked behind mirrored glass, Valerie crossed one leg over the other and sipped her chamomile tea. The feed from camera 4 followed Paige through the hallway, her heel catching slightly on a fresh carpet seam. "That carpet's new," Paige muttered. Marissa hummed her agreement. "It's not like that for the gala we attended here last year? Didn't it used to smell more antique?" Valerie smirked. "It used to smell neglected," she said, to no one but herself. She reached into the mini-fridge beside her and retrieved a small bottle of Rosé Brut. The handwritten tag tied to the neck had been prepared earlier, slipped quietly into an insulated velvet pouch. She picked up her phone, texted June just one word: deliver. 20 minutes later, the bridal suite door opened with a quiet knock. Paige's cousin accepted the bottle without question. The note tied beneath the ribbon read, "To the real guest of honor. Warmly your host." Paige stared at it for a full 5 seconds. Then again. She didn't say anything. Didn't ask. But her eyes darted to the display screen on the wall. The same image looped as earlier. Valerie in the back row, expression unreadable, hands folded like a secret. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. Out in the hallway, Beverly adjusted the cuff of her linen blazer and casually handed the front desk assistant a sealed envelope. "This is for the bride's mother," she said, her southern lilt sugar smooth, "from a former guest." The envelope read, "Enjoy the venue. You made it unforgettable." BM Marissa read it, smirked. Must be a fan. Paige wasn't so sure. She scanned the walls, the trim, the lighting she hadn't noticed before. The fireplace now accented with crown molding. The photo loop she couldn't stop glancing at. "Do you remember who bought this place?" she asked her mom, voice casual. Marissa shrugged. "I assumed the same folks. It's still Oak Harvest, right?" Paige looked down at the champagne label, then back at the mirrored wall. "No," she whispered. "It's not." From the mezzanine, Valerie leaned forward slightly, just enough to see Paige's gaze searching the glass. She said nothing, but she didn't look away, because recognition wasn't necessary, just proximity. Let them feel her, let them wonder, let them toast again, and wonder why the bubbles burned. Marcus's call came at 10:07 a.m. on a Thursday. Weekday casual, no pretext, no voicemail. Valerie let it ring 4 times before picking up, her tone serene and undistracted. "Hello? Hey Ma, got a minute?" She didn't respond right away. The only sound was her pen scratching notes on a linen supplier quote. "I'm listening." Marcus cleared his throat. "So, Paige's cousin, Natalie? She went to a party last weekend at Oak Harvest, said it's under new ownership. Real sharp, real tight operation. Said the new owners, strict but elegant." Valerie allowed a pause. "Sounds like they made a good impression," she said, uncapping her fountain pen with one hand, flipping through vendor receipts with the other. "Yeah, well," she said, "some of the upgrades felt familiar, like it had your touch." Valerie smiled, but it didn't reach her voice. "Interesting. Anyway," Marcus continued, stretching the word like taffy, "I figured I'd check in. See how you're doing." "I'm thriving," she replied. "Renovating. Remember the wedding?" There was a beat. "Come on," he said, a bit too light. "That was just a little tense. You were a bit dramatic, Ma." Valerie stopped writing, looked out her office window where a contractor was adjusting the new gold-trimmed signage. She said it plainly. "You were a bit disposable," then hung up. The line clicked back to silence like a period at the end of a sentence no one was ready for. 10 minutes later, Marcus sent a text. "Wait, did you buy it?" No reply. Instead, Valerie walked down to the ballroom, where Beverly stood on a ladder adjusting velvet drapes to frame the west wall's new skylight. "You still good for that teaser post?" Beverly called down. "Women in power theme?" "Make it subtle," Valerie said, "but don't be shy." An hour later, the photo went live on Beverly's Instagram. It showed Valerie, silhouetted, centered, chin slightly lifted, as she stood mid-ballroom beneath a shaft of natural light. Caption: "Every woman has her season. Some just learn to bloom later." The post racked up over 3,000 likes in the first afternoon. Valerie didn't share it, She didn't need to. Marcus saw it anyway. Screenshots reached him through mutuals. One comment below the post read, "Wait, is this the Charleston venue everyone's whispering about?" Another said, "That's a power pose if I've ever seen one." He didn't text again, but his silence came threaded with recognition this time, not confusion. That evening, Valerie stood in the bridal suite, adjusting a new art print above the vanity. A hand-lettered quote beneath soft florals read, "You are not a guest in your own story." Behind her, the room glowed warm, recessed lighting, soundproof walls, plush seating, every inch remade not for performance, but for peace. She turned off the main lights and walked the length of the ballroom in the dark. Just enough ambient glow to reveal the new custom flooring, where etched into the corner beneath the archway, invisible to most, were 5 words, built by what was discarded. She ran her fingers across the grain of the wood, then walked back toward her office, slow and steady. On her desk sat a sealed envelope addressed to the Charleston Women's Leadership Forum. Inside, a check, a keynote application, and one line in her bio that read, "Mother, investor, builder." As she reached for her cup of tea, her phone buzzed again. Not Marcus, not Beverly. A calendar notification, Harbor family anniversary, 6 days out. She smiled, then whispered into the empty room, "And may the guests be seated." The cease and desist arrived in a cream envelope sealed with wax, dramatic, unnecessary, and entirely on brand for Marissa Harbor. Valerie opened it with a letter opener shaped like a heron's beak, the kind she kept on her desk for gestures that deserved elegance but not effort. Inside, 3 pages of dense legalese and indignation, words like misrepresentation, breach of contract, and emotional distress floated above a sea of jargon. She didn't even blink. Instead, she forwarded it to Mitchell Green, her attorney of 15 years. He called back within the hour, dry as toast. "They've got nothing," he said, flipping pages in the background. "Your contract is bulletproof, non-refundable deposit, no clause for cancellation without cause, and your new event code of conduct was signed twice." "Anything I should worry about?" Valerie asked, stirring a sugar cube into her espresso. "Only that they'll be louder before they realize they've already lost." That afternoon, Paige's father posted on Facebook, "We've recently learned that our anniversary event is being hosted by someone with a personal vendetta, unprofessional and unbecoming. 12 likes, 5 heart reacts, 1 typo." Valerie didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, her publicist quietly distributed a press packet to Charleston's local lifestyle blog, The Southern Current, highlighting the venue's transformation under new leadership. The article hit by Friday, "A Southern Space Reimagined: How Oak Harvest Found New Life Under Inclusive Ownership," photos of the renovated bridal suite, quotes about accessibility, a section on redefining Southern hospitality. The byline didn't mention Valerie by name, but readers didn't miss the message. Within 24 hours, 2 brands dropped Paige from their influencer collaborations. By Sunday, the Harbors were backpedaling in group texts and private DMs. Still, the event proceeded. No cancellation, no press conference, just silence, forced and formal. On the evening of the anniversary, Valerie dressed in graphite silk and stepped into the venue from the private north entrance, her heels making no more sound than her smile. She moved through the upper hallway unseen, taking the lift to the mezzanine suite overlooking the ballroom. Soundproofed, velvet draped, perfectly elevated. June handed her a flute of Prosecco. "Everything's on schedule," she whispered. "Seating complete, catering flawless, 1 minor tantrum, handled." Valerie looked down. Paige wore champagne satin. Her posture was tight, her smile thinner than gloss could conceal. Marissa clutched a program like it owed her money. Her husband, Carlton, looked everywhere but up. The ballroom glowed. And from her hidden perch, Valerie watched the same people who once seated her near a catering door now swirl beneath chandeliers she'd chosen, surrounded by walls she'd rebuilt, seated on cushions she'd hand-tested for comfort. A quartet played jazz softly in the background. Carlton stood to give his toast. "This has been a meaningful journey," he said, clearing his throat. A celebration of marriage, legacy, and family. His voice faltered because he looked up and saw her. Valerie Monroe, seated in the VIP balcony above, poised, composed, backlit by a wall sconce that turned her into an oil painting of justice. He blinked. Once. Twice. She raised her glass, sipped, no smile, just acknowledgement. His words tangled. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his flute and offered a vague wave. No one else noticed. But Paige did. She followed his gaze, eyes scanning the mezzanine. And for a flicker, barely a breath, recognition lit behind her lashes. Beverly, 2 rows over, bit the rim of her glass to suppress a laugh. Later that night, as the guests filtered out beneath soft garden lanterns and the waitstaff collected linen napkins folded to military precision, Valerie lingered in the dark. No speech. No spotlight. But every corner of that room had whispered her name. And somewhere between the blush florals and too sweet cake, they all knew. This party belonged to her. She didn't steal it. They mailed her the invitation. They just didn't read the fine print. The knock came at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, quiet but firm, 3 measured taps that didn't belong to a courier or a neighbor. Valerie looked up from her breakfast table, where her planner lay open beside a bowl of sliced pears and chamomile tea. She didn't need to check the peephole. She already knew. When she opened the door, Marcus stood on her porch with the same tentative expression he used to wear when he forgot to take the trash out in high school, 1 part guilt, 2 parts expectation. "I didn't call," he said quickly, as if that might soften things. "I was already in the area." Valerie stepped aside, wordlessly, and gestured toward the kitchen. He sat at the table across from her, glancing around like the house had changed since he'd last visited. It hadn't. Not in any visible way. But maybe the weight inside it had. "I just wanted to talk," he began, avoiding eye contact as he traced a fingertip along the wood grain of the table. "Look, I know there's been tension. A lot of stuff lately." Valerie reached for the kettle and refilled her cup, not offering to pour for him. He pressed on. "Paige's family is upset, and yeah, maybe they handled some things poorly, but this whole venue thing, it's turning into a standoff. Can we not escalate this?" She set the kettle down gently, the porcelain base making a soft clink against the counter. "You think this is an escalation?" she asked, voice even. Marcus nodded. "I think it's becoming personal when it doesn't need to be." Valerie moved slowly toward her study, returning with a slim gray folder that she placed carefully in front of him. Inside were neatly printed documents: the title deed to the venue, the purchase agreement, her renovation budget, occupancy permits, press coverage, and a color-coded projection report for the next fiscal year. Tucked into the back was a copy of her investment portfolio with Cypress Tide LLC printed in the header. "I don't escalate," she said. "I execute." Marcus's eyes moved across the documents in silence. His mouth opened, then closed. He reached for the glass of iced tea Valerie had placed earlier, but his hand stalled halfway. He didn't drink. "I didn't know," he finally muttered. "That's clear," she replied, unblinking. He looked up, and for the first time in years, she saw in him not a grown man or a husband or someone else's son-in-law, but the boy who used to leave his lunchbox in her car and cry when he couldn't find it. "I didn't mean to," he began. Valerie shook her head once. "You meant to overlook. You meant to delegate me to the quiet spaces and hoped I'd sit there smiling. That's what you meant." Marcus stood slowly, taking a breath as if trying to collect something he hadn't quite earned. "Okay," he said softly. "I get it now." She nodded once, then turned her eyes back to the folder. He left without finishing his tea. After the door clicked shut behind him, Valerie walked back to her study. She opened the drawer beneath her printer, pulled out her will, and made a notation in the margin. Marcus Monroe, family photo album, 1989 to 2006. Nothing more. Later that afternoon, Beverly stopped by with an envelope bearing the gold insignia of the Charleston Women's Leadership Forum. "You've been added to the panel," she said, eyes gleaming. "Keynote slot. They want you to speak on reclaiming space." Valerie accepted the envelope and laid it gently on her desk, beside the folder Marcus had left untouched. Outside, wind rustled through the trees, casting long shadows across her lawn. She sat down, picked up her pen, and began drafting notes for the speech she would give, about power, silence, and the cost of pretending not to notice when your name is absent from the list of the living, because Marcus had come for a truce. But what he didn't know was that this was never a war. It was a record, and records, unlike apologies, live forever. The article arrived on a Tuesday, mid-morning, while the air still held the breath of spring and her coffee hadn't yet gone cold. The Charleston Ledger's March issue had her name in fine serif on the cover: Valerie Monroe, Quiet Power, Unshaken Grace. Beneath it, a full-page photo caught her seated on the edge of the newly restored bridal suite's velvet bench, one hand resting on her knee, the other holding a folded seating card. Valerie read it once, slowly, then once again, not out of vanity, but for calibration. She measured every sentence for tone, implication, grace under pressure. The interviewer had done her justice, no embellishment, no vendetta, just truth, lined with steel. Valerie Monroe, 74, former real estate strategist and current owner of Cypress Tide Venue in Charleston, speaks with the clarity of someone who no longer apologizes for taking up space. I've learned that silence doesn't always mean peace, the article read. Sometimes it means dismissal, and there's a cost to being politely erased. She spoke about investment, not just in brick and mortar, but in people. About what it means to be seen, and how quickly others stop looking when they've decided your role is already played out. "My story isn't vengeance," she was quoted as saying. "It's proof of breadth. You don't have to raise your voice to reclaim a room, you just have to own the floor." By midweek, local business leaders reposted the article on their LinkedIn feeds, adding captions like "Leadership Defined" and "Wisdom we should have listened to sooner." The Charleston Women's Collective requested a feature piece. A city councilwoman invited her to co-chair a grant panel for women over 50, and a mayoral candidate asked if she'd consider a community mentorship role. Valerie declined the political overture. She had no patience for televised civility. Meanwhile, Paige's curated image began to thin. Brands quietly stopped tagging her. Collaborations disappeared without formal statements. One boutique archived a wedding shoot from their homepage without fanfare. The hashtags she once curated, #LegacyBride, #SouthernGracious, stopped trending. It wasn't scandal, it was erosion, silent and absolute. Marcus moved to Atlanta by the end of the quarter. No dinner, no goodbye. Not even a change of address email. Just a forwarded lease confirmation Beverly noticed while sorting venue mail. Valerie saw it and said nothing. She didn't mourn absences that had been rehearsed long before they arrived. Instead, she met with the two waitstaff who'd remembered to bring her water that wedding night, the only ones who'd spoken to her like she belonged in the room. Anita, now working part-time while studying early childhood education, and James, who'd left hospitality altogether after being passed over for a promotion in favor of someone with better optics. Valerie offered them both management roles. "I'm not asking for miracles," she told them. "I'm asking for decency, from you and through you." Anita now oversaw the bridal wing. Every fabric, every schedule, every apology sent before one needed to be made. James managed staff operations with clockwork precision. Together they made the place breathe, not just function. "You sure this isn't too much for us?" Anita asked one evening, surveying a full client calendar. "No," Valerie replied, her voice low but firm. "It's just enough. You knew how to serve without shrinking. That's the skill I built this place around." That evening, Valerie walked the halls alone after the last tour group left. The ballroom was dim, the sconces set to their softest setting. On the far wall, a new plaque had been mounted, not in the entryway, not by the stage, but near the guest coat room. It read, "To every woman placed in the corner, you were never furniture, you were the foundation." She stood before it for a moment, not for recognition, for remembrance. Outside, Beverly leaned against the garden archway, phone in hand, scrolling through another round of online mentions. "They keep asking for interviews," she called. "They want to know what's next for you." Valerie looked out across the quiet lawn, where evening light gathered on the leaves like old stories finally told aloud. She tucked her hands into her pockets and said, "Tell them this. I'm not done restoring. I'm just getting to the rooms no one noticed before." And somewhere between the rustle of wind and walls that had once hidden her, Valerie smiled. Because legacy wasn't loud. It was built plank by plank until silence sounded like structure. It arrived tucked between invoices and vendor catalogs in an envelope soft with age. Valerie didn't notice it at first, not until she sifted through the morning mail after the second staff meeting and saw the careful cursive looping across a pale blue envelope. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, old-fashioned, but proud. No return address, just her name, Valerie Monroe. She opened it slowly, seated at her desk in the quiet hush of late afternoon, when the light through her study windows bent warm across the floor. The letter was handwritten in fountain ink. The first line read, "Valerie, you deserved better." She paused. Her chest didn't rise. Her breath hadn't caught, but it also hadn't continued. Something in her stilled. The letter was from Helen Harbor, Paige's grandmother, Paige's late father's mother, a woman Valerie had seen perhaps twice in her entire life, always polite, always peripheral. Valerie continued reading. "I watched you from the second row that day. I saw what they didn't want to see, the way your smile held while your seat held nothing of you. I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking for absolution or alignment. I just wanted you to know. One woman saw another, and I remembered this photo. You holding Marcus, 2 months old. You looked like the whole world stopped for him. I thought you should have it. I thought it belonged with you." With warmth, Helen folded inside the letter was a single Polaroid. The colors had softened with time, the edges worn slightly. In it, Valerie sat on a plaid picnic blanket, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face, baby Marcus bundled in her lap. His hand reached toward her necklace. Her face, unposed, unguarded, looked like peace. She hadn't seen that photo in decades. She hadn't known it existed. Her hands didn't shake, but her vision blurred softly, as if something inside her had just stepped into the light after too long in the dark. The tears came silently. No sob, no crumpling, just warmth sliding down her cheeks, collecting along her jawline. She let them fall. She didn't reach for a tissue. She didn't wipe anything away. When Beverly arrived later, with 2 café lattes and a new set of mock-ups for the East Wing art installation, she took one look at Valerie and stopped mid-step. "Oh," she said softly. "Honey." Valerie didn't speak. She just turned the letter around and handed it over. Beverly read it carefully, without interruption. When she was done, she set it down and then, without ceremony, knelt beside her. "You earned your silence," she murmured, "but you earned your sorrow too." Valerie didn't respond right away. Eventually, she reached for her pen and a fresh sheet of stationery from the drawer, cream paper, heavier than it looked. She wrote carefully, the loops deliberate, the ink slow to dry. At the top, she wrote, "Dear Valerie, thank you for not shrinking." She continued, "Thank you for not accepting less than truth just to be liked. Thank you for not folding at the edge of someone else's comfort. Thank you for knowing that the difference between rage and grace is only breath. And thank you for never mistaking dismissal for peace." She signed it plainly. "With love, Valerie." Then she folded the page, sealed it in an envelope, and walked to her office wall safe. She placed it inside, next to property deeds, financial statements, and the seating card now mounted behind museum-grade glass, not for legacy, for record. She closed the safe door and turned the dial slowly, letting the final click land with weight. Outside, the sun was starting to dip, turning the lawn bronze. Valerie stood at the window, photo still in hand. She looked at the child she had raised, the son who had grown. And finally, she let go of the hope that he'd ever return in the shape she'd loved. She wasn't grieving a betrayal. She was grieving an illusion. And illusions, once grieved, don't come back. They leave room for breath. The dress had hung at the back of her hall closet for nearly a year. Not the wedding gown, not anything sentimental, Just the deep slate blue sheath she'd worn the day Marcus got married, modest neckline, cap sleeves, satin lining that never quite sat right against her skin. It had looked graceful in photos, but wearing it had felt like wearing apology stitched into fabric. Valerie removed the garment bag one morning, just after sunrise. The venue was quiet, her inbox blessedly still. She unzipped it slowly, the scent of cedar and faint perfume drifting into the air like memory. She held it up by the hanger and studied it in the mirror, not for vanity, but for closure. There were no stains, no rips, no visible signs of the indignity it had absorbed. But she knew. She remembered how it felt to be seated behind a pillar, smiling at shadows. The gown didn't belong to her anymore. She folded it carefully into a large donation box, padded it with tissue, and included a handwritten note. For someone beginning again. Grace isn't what you wear, it's what you reclaim. She donated it to the Clementine Circle, a local nonprofit that helped widowed and single mothers navigate milestone moments with dignity. They hosted community events, pop-up boutiques, and occasionally small ceremonies for those who had no aisle left to walk but still wanted to stand in light. Valerie kept nothing from the outfit except the ivory clutch. It still held the seating card, folded once, creased but unbent. She placed it gently back in her safe, beside her letter, beside the legacy she had rewritten in ink. Business at Cypress Tide had changed since the ledger feature. Word had spread, not of revenge, but of refuge. Within months, the calendar filled. Bookings rolled in faster than the staff could color code. Not from Charleston's elite or its social climbers, but from those rarely given the center aisle, blended families, formerly estranged parents, aging brides, foster care adoptees, people rebuilding their names after others tried to erase them. And then one afternoon, on a slow Wednesday, a young woman with short curls and shaking hands stepped into the foyer for a scheduled tour. She was soft-spoken, carrying a notebook tucked close to her chest like a shield. Her name was Liana. She was planning a vow renewal, not for appearances, she said, but survival. Her first wedding had been held in a courthouse while her mother stood 2 cities away in silence. They'd recently begun speaking again. Liana wanted to begin again. Valerie led the tour herself. When they reached the bridal wing, Liana paused. Her eyes swept over the floral sconces, the low chaise, the mirror that reflected softness without distortion. She pressed her palm to the doorframe, blinked, and turned toward Valerie with tears already forming. "I've never felt this scene in my life," she whispered. Valerie simply nodded. That's the whole point. Later that week, she quietly asked Anita to begin compiling a new rate sheet, one that offered significant discounts to mothers attending solo or those listed under +1 with no guest. No announcement, no banners, just a quiet check mark in the system that triggered compassion without condition. A review showed up days later on a niche wedding blog, no photo attached, just a title, "This place understands dignity." The post read, "I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't on the original list. But they let me in. They didn't just seat me, they saw me. I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like I mattered." Valerie didn't print the review. She didn't frame it. But she read it twice before forwarding it to Beverly with a 2-word subject line, "More, please." That evening, Valerie returned to the ballroom alone. The walls glowed under amber uplights, and soft music played from the practice playlist, an instrumental version of Harvest Moon that filtered through the space like prayer. She stood in the very center of the floor, the same place where, a year ago, her son hadn't looked back. Now the room pulsed with warmth not owed to lineage, but to design, to choice. And for the first time, Valerie didn't feel the ache of what hadn't been returned. She felt the fullness of what she had built, not out of bitterness, out of blueprint, out of breath. The message came through a mutual friend, not in hushed gossip or behind a cocktail napkin at a gala, but during a casual brunch at the Terrace Cafe downtown, where Valerie and Beverly met every second Sunday, rain or shine. They were midway through coffee and croissant halves when Lena Rhodes, retired librarian, quiet Charleston institution, tilted her glasses down and said it in passing. "I heard your son's been listening to you." Valerie looked up, brow poised but not furrowed. "Listens to your panels online," Lena added, buttering toast. "The one about reclaiming space and the one from the leadership forum last fall. Someone told me he's watched them both more than once." Beverly didn't say a word. She just watched Valerie's face for tremor. There was none. "I suppose even echoes find their way home," Valerie said after a moment calmly. "Eventually." Lena sipped her tea. "He also divorced Paige." That made Beverly blink. "Really?" 6 months ago, quiet filing. No drama, not even an Instagram post about growing separately in grace or whatever that girl would have usually written. The rest of the conversation moved on. Local elections, a church fundraiser, a new poetry reading at the library. But Valerie's mind didn't drift. That evening, back at her home office, she sat by the window where dusk settled in steady streaks across the glass. She turned her phone face down on the table, not out of avoidance, but habit. Then she flipped it back. One new message, no contact photo, just a name, Marcus, 3 lines. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here, no pressure, just wanted you to know." Valerie read it once, and again. Then she set the phone down, untouched. She didn't delete it. She didn't reply, but she didn't block him either. The message hung there like a door left half-cracked, not enough to enter but enough to see light. Around 9 p.m. she returned to Cypress Tide. No events scheduled, no staff on duty, just the echo of what had been: linen-wrapped chairs, glass sconces on low dim, chandeliers stilled mid-glimmer. She walked slowly through the main hall, heels soft against the polished floor, stopping once beneath the mezzanine balcony. The same place he had once stood during the anniversary toast. The same balcony he had looked up toward and flinched. Valerie inhaled deeply, not from effort, but from memory. She moved next through the west hallway, pausing by the bridal suite doorway, and then into the heart of the ballroom itself. Here, where it all began, where she had first sat, uninvited but present, where they had once tried to forget her, and where they now booked, month after month, hoping to borrow even a shadow of her design. She stood in the very center of the floor. For a moment, she closed her eyes. And in the quiet, she remembered his laugh. Not the grown voice layered with condescension or clipped apology, but his laugh as a baby, full, round, bubbled with light and no edges. The one he gave freely when she played peekaboo on park benches or danced like a fool in their linoleum kitchen. That laugh lived somewhere beyond resentment. Before conditioning. She opened her eyes, exhaled slowly. "I hope you find yourself," she said softly, the words not bitter, not sharp, not heavy, just honest. "I already did." She walked to the wall panel, fingers brushing against the switch plate like it was velvet. With a flick, the chandeliers dimmed to gold, then cut to black. The sconces followed, one by one, until the room was quiet shadow. She crossed the marble threshold toward the double doors, turned once more to look, not at a building, but at a monument shaped by healing, not hunger. She locked the doors behind her. There was no final gesture, no cinematic turn, just the hush of resolve, and the sound of keys being placed back into a coat pocket already lined with peace. The invitation had gone out quietly, no billboards, no glossy mailers with gilded edges, just a soft linen envelope with hand-lettered names and the words, "You were never meant to sit in the shadows. Come take your seat." It was Valerie's first public event at Cypress Tide since the remodel had been completed in full, and this time, there would be no head table stacked with surnames or seating tiers built on inheritance. The guest list included retired teachers, former nannies, disinvited aunts, community center directors, one lunch lady, and a chorus of women who had once worn dresses to events where their names had been left off the program. The ballroom shimmered. Soft brass sconces lined the walls. A local jazz trio filled the air with melodies that lilted but didn't demand. The carpet underfoot was quiet as breath. There were no numbered tables, only names, written in cursive, placed dead center. No one was off to the side. Beverly, dressed in navy and silver, passed her a glass of champagne before the toast. "You pulled it off," she said, her eyes misted with the same disbelief that attends answered prayers. Valerie's nod was subtle, but rooted. No one pulls this off alone. Later, when she took the mic, briefly with the ease of someone who no longer needed applause to know her own worth, she said only this: "I was once told I mattered, then forgotten like I hadn't heard it. Tonight is for every woman who still remembers the promise, even when the spotlight didn't reach her. You don't have to forgive the world for that, but you can outlive it." The applause was not thunderous, it was reverent. It rippled softly, like light across water, steady and deep. The next morning, a podcast episode featuring her interview aired on The Quiet Comeback. In it, Valerie spoke of grace, not as softness, but as the muscle behind restraint. She spoke of ownership, not just of property, but of story. She told the host, in the kind of voice that makes headlines without raising pitch, "When they hand you a place at the margins, build a center from it." The episode trended for 2 weeks. Emails flooded in. So Valerie did what she always did when the wind shifted in her favor. She used it to open more doors. She established the Cypress Tide Mentorship Fund, offering microgrants to women over 40 who wanted to reinvent, not because they failed, but because they were no longer willing to disappear. The fund didn't require resumes. Just a one-page answer. What have you learned that no one paid you for yet? The first recipient was a 62-year-old former caregiver named Dolores, who wanted to start a home bakery and needed help leasing kitchen space. The second was a bus driver named Carla, who had a screenplay in her glove box. And one morning, tucked between press clippings and thank you notes, Valerie received a floral arrangement of pale anemones and Queen Anne's lace, simple, soft, unassuming. The card inside read, "Still cheering for you. H.H. Helen Harbor." Valerie smiled, not out of victory, out of quiet astonishment that the people who'd once held distance like doctrine could still find their way to kindness. Later that day, she walked into her office, carrying a small black frame. Inside it, the seating card, Valerie Monroe, guest still folded, still marked, the same artifact she had once kept as silent proof, but this time it was mounted behind glass. A museum label beneath it read, "The Price of Silence, the Power of Ownership." She hung it on the wall just above her desk, eye level, not tucked away. Then she checked the time, grabbed her clutch, and walked toward the ballroom. Her staff was ready. The doors opened at 6 p.m., and there she stood, not waiting in a corner, not glancing from the back row, but leading the line. Her posture calm, her name spoken with clarity, no introductions required. As the guests flowed in, welcomed by soft light and a table that didn't exclude, Valerie stood at the threshold with a smile that asked for nothing but received everything. And when the final attendee walked past her into the room she had built plank by plank, she looked toward the chandelier and whispered what she never got to say that day, "They gave me guest. I gave myself the keys."